known for a few months, and I did not realize when I first learned of this that Utah would be so enmeshed in our current fraught political landscape around diversity, equity, and inclusion. I mean, hi, let me take on the most challenging topic I could possibly think of. And there's a touch of irony in meeting today and using the terms diversity, equity, and inclusion together, right, in a single phrase at a higher institution. For those of you who don't know or are not aware, the Utah State Legislature passed a law last week that public higher institutions cannot use the words diversity, equity, and inclusion together to refer to any policy, procedure, practice, program, office, initiative, or training. So good thing this lecture is none of those things. And I want to be very clear that none of you should feel compelled to agree with me with what I say today. I know you're all here of your own independent thinking and your own free will and choice, except my husband. And I have to say that my husband runs his company very inclusively, so we wouldn't be able to be married otherwise. Levity aside, I do want to take a moment to express my profound appreciation for the individuals who champion DEI. The professionals I've had the privilege of working with in this field are among the most inclusive, empathetic, and passionate individuals that I've encountered. Many of them generously devote their precious free time to building inclusive communities and promoting meaningful change. We tend to use the words tireless and fearless when describing people who work in DEI. I've engaged in numerous heartfelt conversations with them recently, and I know they are tired. They are fearful. They're concerned about the future. And I deliver this talk as a tribute to their unwavering commitment to forging a more equitable and inclusive future for us all. Their dedication serves as an inspiration to me and hopefully to many of you today. The words diversity, equity, and inclusion have been in our lexicon for centuries. If you look at the world of finance, diversification and equity are known to enhance financial value. In the field of law, equity is a remedy where the strict application of the law does not provide adequate justice based on fairness and moral considerations. In our business cultures, research underscores that increased diversity, equity, and inclusion builds social capital value that contributes to higher performing teams and drives business growth and spurs innovation. So we find ourselves at a pivotal moment where the scrutiny of DEI has intensified. I'll provide some context regarding the dilemmas that leaders face, and then I'll outline some actionable steps that leaders can take collectively to navigate this challenging time together. In 2020, many leaders found themselves confronted for the first time by vocal employees who genuinely expected them to take action on matters of social justice. Rumblings against racial injustice had been escalating since the 2016 presidential election. The global COVID-19 pandemic and ensuing economic disruption created the perfect storm to highlight the plight of underserved communities. To speak frankly, most leaders were not equipped to address social justice within their businesses. Even DEI professionals like me were not necessarily social justice warriors. Faced with these challenges and often with a sincere desire to do something helpful, business leaders made a lot of reactive decisions. These included issuing DEI statements, appointing heads of DEI, often without adequate budget or support, and implementing company-wide DEI training programs. Some companies, however, embraced the opportunity to thoroughly examine their corporate cultures. They buckled down and embarked on the substantial task of shifting their cultures toward greater inclusivity. And I've had the privilege of working and collaborating with a few of these forward-thinking companies. Fast forward to 2024, we face a different kind of storm, one that has also been brewing for many years. Legislative processes and courts have historically been battlegrounds for matters of equality. Laws such as the Fair Pay Act of 2009, all the way back to the landmark Civil Rights Act of 1964. However, we are currently witnessing a highly coordinated nationwide effort to legislate beyond just civil rights and discrimination laws. The legislation exhibits remarkable uniformity across states, often derived from model bills. These bills consistently focus on these 5 areas. First, eliminating DEI offices from higher education institutions. 2, restricting mandatory DEI training. 3, abolishing DEI statements. 4, ending affirmative action policies based on identity. And 5, restricting LGBTQ and transgender rights. As someone who has worked on DEI for decades and celebrated the overall progress that we have made, it's just disheartening to see these legislative developments. And at a time when business leaders are just beginning to understand the effective implementation and what that looks like. Utah is increasingly becoming more diverse. We also have the best economy in the nation and the lowest unemployment rate. To continue to strengthen our economy, we should build company cultures that retain talent inside our state. Often, our fast-growing companies must seek talent from outside of the state. These global perspectives help Utah businesses reach more customers and partners. Utah also recruits large businesses who want to build and grow in Utah, creating more jobs. Our state is competing with larger and more diverse markets. Most importantly, each one of us benefits by living in a state where everyone can thrive and reach their potential. I want to reassure you that leaders can continue the work of diversity, equity, inclusion in their companies, even in the wake of such legislation. I'll offer some suggestions for that later in my talk. However, I'm concerned that leaders who lack a deeper understanding of DEI will pivot or relinquish their efforts. I've worked with boards and executives long enough that I understand that they bear tremendous responsibility to keep their companies viable. And I hope today's talk will instill some ideas and courage in leaders to continue this vitally important work. Because business leaders know better than anyone that employees notice when DEI commitments wane. The ongoing political debates surrounding DEI may give an impression of navigating a battlefield and trying to avoid landmines. And in a war, someone has to be the enemy, and there can only be one winner. The truth is, diversity, equity, inclusion is more like taking a trip to a different country to expand your global perspective. My husband and I traveled to Ireland a couple of years ago. We navigated narrow country roads while trying to drive on the left side of the road. We sometimes got lost or stuck trying to find a castle. We had to measure speed and weight using this thing called the metric system. I was in awe of Trinity College Library. I ate some really bad oysters, and we were invited to crash an Irish country wedding. And I know that sounds a little bit like an oxymoron. The wedding guests included guests from every county in Ireland and some Irish folks from the US, and they all spoke different dialects. And I would do it all over again. Well, maybe not the oysters. Leaders were certainly exploring new territory in 2020. And a few of them reached out to DEI consultants like me because when you're traveling in a different country, it's useful to have a guide who's been there before. I would often find myself in the position of a coach, hearing from business leaders how their well-intended first attempts at addressing racial equities did not go so well. Getting lost on the journey to a new place can be very jarring for well-intended leaders who thought they were on the right path. Imagine their relief when I assured them that missteps and fumbles are a normal part of learning as a leader. Experiencing a less effective approach to DEI can help them understand the value of a more transformative approach. The fact that these business leaders stayed open to feedback is a credit to their self-awareness. With this willingness to learn, we can get back on the path and enjoy the journey without getting stalled or getting stuck in a ditch. Given the situation that we find ourselves in today, I empathize with leaders who feel they are in a tough position of choosing to maintain their DEI efforts or going under the radar until the storm blows over. I can understand why leaders would be afraid of losing social capital, political capital, and even financial capital if they're seen as supporting DEI. Big storms like this can sometimes obscure our vision, and it's only human to make protective decisions. For the students and younger folk in the room who are thinking about DEI work in your future, I'm here to tell you that it is not all fun and games. Sometimes travelers get tired, hangry, or homesick. Sometimes leaders get stuck because of their own emotions. No matter how strategic a leader is, DEI always hits a very personal chord. And emotions, as we know, sometimes can produce illogical behaviors. Leaders working in DEI often encounter passionate individuals. Occasionally, these individuals may come across as self-righteous or judgmental of those who hold differing views. Conversely, some individuals may strongly resist involvement in DEI efforts in any capacity. The social storms affecting our nation have begun infiltrating our workplace, skewing some people's idea of what DEI really is. So it falls to DEI professionals, hopefully in partnership with executive teams, to guide team members through these emotions so the company can move on the same path and in the same direction. I can't think of any other business role that carries so much emotional weight. DEI professionals often face the most criticism from outside a company and the least support from within organizations, as reflected by their high turnover rates. I speak for the hundreds of DEI professionals in our state. We cannot do this work alone. I want to suggest 3 things that any ethical leader can do during these divisive times. First, businesses belong in the legislative process. I've had the opportunity to work on many nonprofit and public-private task forces over the past 2 decades. At first, these policy meetings would test my patience because things happened much more slowly than in the business world. But I came to appreciate their purpose in bringing diverse sectors together to collaborate. Utah prides itself on being able to bring people together and make things happen quickly because of these long-standing relationships. I've come to value Utah's business-friendly policies, workforce quality, entrepreneurial spirit, and industry variety. I forged relationships with almost every sector of Utah's ecosystem and even participated in running some bills in the state legislature. I've noticed that many business leaders often hesitate to engage with the legislative process. Understandably, your business and personal lives are busy, and you probably have a perception of what lawmakers are like. Well, legislators are normal people, just like you and me, with their own set of job pressures. Lawmakers will not always invite all impacted stakeholders to the table. It takes some patience not to get entrenched in frustration. My advice to business leaders is to be proactive and reach out to them. Most lawmakers appreciate an opportunity to talk with their constituents about their proposed bills. It's relatively easy to schedule a meeting with their interns. Legislators are best persuaded by specific and concrete examples, such as impact on business operations, recruiting talent, or attracting customers. Legislators may not foresee all of the unintended consequences of their proposed bills. The perspective and experience of business leaders is incredibly valuable to the legislative process. When it comes to DEI legislation, it is often individuals from ethnic minorities and the LGBTQ community who take up the mantle to oppose legislation. Their passion is admirable. However, there exists a misperception that DEI legislation exclusively affects these groups. This is far from the truth. The recently passed DEI bills in our legislature specifically relate to gender and sex. It is imperative for everyone, including white women and white men, to speak to legislators about the impacts of legislation that affects all Utahns. People of color and LGBTQ communities should not bear the sole responsibility of speaking up, and they are not the only ones impacted by legislation. Business leaders should be concerned about how legislative decisions impact their businesses. Utah has long prided itself on being a business-friendly state. This means that the legislature tries to avoid excessive regulation of business behavior. The recent DEI bills are a shift from this tradition by introducing numerous causes of action. I'm happy to report that so far, none of the DEI bills have had direct impact on the work that I do with my clients. This is partly due to great advocates who are making sure the bills are focused on specific issues. And from the beginning of my consulting, I've tried to steer away from the practices that the legislators are concerned about. For example, DEI statements that resemble pledges aren't effective in my mind. I've witnessed many community pledges over the years, and they had limited influence on culture change and can be easily forgotten. This should be differentiated from the legitimate need for DEI training and related experiences for occupations that significantly interact with the public or to improve the ability to provide business services. Business leaders can help keep lawmakers accountable to solve real problems. For instance, in the case of the higher education DEI bill, concerns regarding the erosion of First Amendment free speech are entirely valid. Yet simply removing DEI offices from higher education institutions will not address the core issue of cancellation or divisive behavior. This short-sighted decision could have long-term impacts on student success, which impacts our future workforce. And if I were a business leader looking for talent, I might be very strategic right now to snatch up those individuals that might be leaving our higher ed offices, our DEI offices. These professionals have significant community and cultural competencies that could affect your business and impact outreach efforts. Don't let the current legislation make you believe that these folks are not valuable. I'd much rather have them stay in our state and help contribute to our state. And when you hire these great folks, be prepared to support them so they can succeed. I'm grateful to the business chambers, policy organizations, and political action committees, PACs, that represent business interests and monitor legislation. Our state legislature will consider hundreds of bills this session. Sometimes DEI-related legislation is tucked away in an obscure bill that business leaders would never know to look at. No one thought the higher education bill would impact private businesses until I pointed out the dozens of public-private partnerships that our state has developed based on personal identity characteristics. These chambers, organizations, and PACs need to hear from business leaders on legislative impacts. They collaborate with legislators to suggest useful amendments. If you're wondering where to start, feel free to reach out to me. Business leaders can make a difference in legislation to benefit our state culture and economy. Second, inclusion is the key to unity. I have loved seeing the evolution of DEI over the years. The fact that this work has evolved to reach the highest levels of an organization is the reason I stay in this field. This work is so much more than compliance, an HR initiative, or an employee resource group. It really has been a dream come true to move away from older approaches and into more sustainable and intentional efforts. I'm grateful that my clients allow me to be creative and strategic in how they advance their work. Certainly, the political and legislative environment add some complexities, but we should continue to use the terms diversity, equity, and inclusion for this field of work. And we should exercise some creativity and not get bogged down in politicizing terminology. We spend a lot of time trying to figure out the order of the letters. Is it D&I, DIB, DEI, IDE, IDEA, and my personal favorite, JEDI, Jedi. J for justice, if you don't know. We all know that it's easy to talk the talk. More important than the letters we use are the skills and behaviors that these acronyms stand for. In my previous career as a patent attorney, we had this phrase, be your own lexicographer. This meant that you could use any words to describe an invention as long as you defined them well enough for someone with skill in that art to understand their meaning. I know it might surprise some people in the room to learn that patent attorneys have to exercise some creativity in their work, and we can take a lesson from patent attorneys and come up with better ways to describe our values and behaviors. It's hard to lead a culture or change a culture when people don't really know what behaviors are expected of them. Demonstrating these behaviors and skills also projects our company values to our customers, our partners, and communities. After leaving the legal profession, I spent a few years traveling the country and creating professional development content for K-12 educators. I studied research on adult and child learning. There's a key concept of meeting a learner where they're at. A master educator will scaffold learning concepts as students gradually master a subject. This pattern made a lot of sense to me. Why would I expect someone who hasn't had 25 years of experience in DEI to have my level of mastery? Remember, business leaders are charting new territory and they need a guide, not a critic. 7 years ago, my company, Inclusion Pro, was born based on meeting learners where they're at and building from their existing leadership skills. We are already inclusive within our trusted circles. Our natural inclination is to gravitate toward affinities and people who share our worldviews in comfortable spaces. An inclusive mindset empowers a leader to broaden their comfort zones to a wider range of perspectives. It primes leaders to hear more diverse ideas, leading to innovation in their business. Companies will more authentically attract a wider range of talent with a higher likelihood that people will stay. This growth mindset also prepares an ethical leader to face dynamics in their organization that create inequalities and work to fix these. It's these culture shifts that employees genuinely desire when they advocate for DEI in your companies. Incidentally, I've worked with leaders who are in the majority for my entire career. I've tried many tactics to get them to take this inclusion journey with me. Based on these experiences and other observations, I understand how they respond to this type of learning. When I first started consulting using this learning-based approach, I wondered if I was being tough enough. But I knew that employing a learning mindset is the best way to reach hearts where people accept feedback to grow their leadership skills. When I begin working with a new client, I plan for at least a few people in the room to hold some reservations about DEI due to previous negative experiences. We always spend some time describing what inclusion might look like in their workplace. Behaviors might include identifying strengths in people, engaging meaningfully with people, creating the same rights for all people, building pathways of success for each person, bridging modalities for each person, feeling genuine acceptance in a community of people. I think everyone in the room would agree that if all leaders did all of these things consistently, we would have much more inclusive cultures. This skills-based approach of describing inclusion helps minimize fears, correct misconceptions, and establish tangible business value from the outset. It can inspire a framework for leaders to develop skills to lead their diverse teams well, which should always be the primary focus. Notice a leader doesn't have to change their religion, political affiliation, or convictions to embrace these behaviors. As any learning and development expert will attest, inclusive leadership skills must be taught, modeled, and practiced. Higher education students rarely receive comprehensive leadership training and instruction in terms of team performance skills. Yet one thing I always hear from industry leaders is the need for collaboration and higher performing teams. So it often falls on businesses to develop these leadership skills in their employees. I know when my clients have achieved inclusion mastery because it shows up in the flow of actual business operations. I've observed clients applying inclusion principles to inform business decisions, leadership training, product development, customer development, and talent acquisition and retention. And leaders are especially delighted and surprised that this can be done without getting political. I want every business leader in Utah to know that despite existing legislation, nothing prevents us from building more inclusive cultures. It is also crucial to include the majority. In 2019, I gave a Best of Disrupt HR talk on including white men. It's common for me to ask clients whether the majority group or a conservative perspective is represented on their inclusion committees. Inclusion does not aim to mold individuals into a particular political ideology. Inclusion is about diversity of viewpoints. One of my clients has a heterosexual white man leading their inclusion committee. Their policy is if you are an inclusive human, you are qualified to be on the committee. I wholeheartedly agree with the idea that inclusive leadership is characterized by skills, not by identity. Inclusion doesn't just magically happen. We must establish behavioral norms rooted in respect and dignity. When someone from the majority participates, they sometimes report they didn't feel as included as they had hoped. Now, this could partially be attributed to feeling like a minority for the first time, which can potentially build empathy. However, they also need to actively experience inclusion. Personally, I've made plenty of mistakes where I made people feel defensive, shut them down, or assumed they weren't able or willing to understand my point of view. I know in these politically challenging times, it is tempting to lash out, but this only deepens the divide. We must welcome the majority into the work of inclusion to achieve true success. Inclusion can be the great equalizer. I'm not particularly fond of the word allyship, as it implies a power imbalance between individuals. I prefer mutual partnerships where all parties benefit. We also sometimes talk about inclusion as bringing our whole authentic selves to work. I'm more a proponent of bringing our best selves and our best thinking to work. Everyone is capable of uplifting others. We must acknowledge that we have the potential to undermine and bring others down, and I'm okay if we leave that part of us outside of work. Hopefully, that part of us won't show up in any space that we're in. One of my clients said this well: bend toward each other, but don't break. Each and every one of us has work to do to ensure that we are uplifting inclusion. In business, there is a saying, there is no I in team. But imagine if we did focus on the I, inclusion. If every ethical leader took a moment for introspection and committed to working on this one aspect, we could accelerate our journey toward equality. Third and finally, forge a brighter future. Gandhi's words resonate deeply right now. Our ability to reach unity in diversity will be the beauty and the test of our civilization. A test we continue to face over 100 years after he wrote those words. Allow me to go on the record by stating that this is undeniably one of the most hopeful periods. Here we are, graciously being hosted by Utah Valley University to discuss the kind of ethical leadership we will need for today and our future. I can honestly affirm that my work with my clients is brimming with energy and innovation, far removed from what political pundits might want you to believe. Throughout history, ethical leaders have consistently risen to the occasion with grace, resilience, and humility, even in the face of adversity. In her Pulitzer Prize-winning book, Team of Rivals, Doris Kearns Goodwin vividly portrays Abraham Lincoln's leadership during one of America's darkest periods. Lincoln's approach to assembling his cabinet after his 1860 election was highly unconventional. Instead of surrounding himself with loyal allies, Lincoln chose to populate his cabinet with his chief rivals from the presidential election. This was a conscious decision to harness a wide range of talents, ideologies, and perspectives for the good of the country. Despite their initial contempt for Lincoln, whom they considered inexperienced and unsophisticated, these men eventually grew to respect, support, and even love him. In a 2006 interview, Goodwin described how Lincoln won his rivals over. Quote, "A set of emotional strengths was the foundation of Lincoln's political genius. He understood that human relations are at the core of politics, and that if you deal with people in the right manner, you are going to be able to work effectively with them. The qualities we associate with human greatness, such as sensitivity, empathy, compassion, kindness, honesty, are also keys to political success. When something went well, Lincoln always shared the credit. When something went wrong, he shouldered his share of the blame. When he himself made a mistake, he acknowledged it immediately. He made time for each of his cabinet members so that they all felt they had access to him. He treated them respectfully and fairly," close quote. I'm sure when Lincoln built his cabinet, he thought of these people less as rivals and more as valuable thought partners. We can be unconventional like Lincoln by building bridges across government, industry, and community. We should include people whose perspectives help us see the broader picture. But instead of seeing each other as rivals and adversaries, let's get more creative in how we describe groups with differences of opinion. Ethical leaders need not feed the fire of controversy. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. echoed the strength of ethical leaders. The ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands at times of challenge and controversy. It is high time for ethical business leaders to step forward and pave the way. Together, let us forge a brighter, more inclusive future. Thank you.